Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the After the Timeout podcast, sponsored by the IBCA. We are a global podcast that shares the passion for the coaching profession. You will hear the stories of coaches from all around the world. We are covering the profession in game, outside of the game, and anything in between. As always, thank you for listening. We look forward to sharing the coaches' stories with you.
We are back with another episode of the After the Timeout podcast. Today's guest is Dustin Battas, head boys basketball coach at Edwardsville High School. Thank you so much for joining us, Coach.
Yeah, guys, thanks so much for having me. I'm always excited to talk basketball, and I appreciate you guys having me on.
So we will start with the opening tip, as we always do. Just let our listeners and us get to know about you and your kind of journey and how you got where you are, and then tell us about your program and what you got going on, so our listeners can kind of check it out and see what you got going.
Yeah, so first I would always try to remind people of what Edwardsville is. We're Southern Illinois, so I think a lot of people think small school, and there are some great small schools down here. But we have about 2,400 kids in our school, so we're 4A basketball in the Southwestern Conference. I just kind of walked into the head coaching job almost by accident. I was a longtime assistant for Mike Waldo, who I'm sure we'll talk about, was a fantastic and still is a fantastic coach, and just kind of volunteered my first year and worked my way through the program and wound up as a varsity assistant, and then he retired from high school. He actually helps out at SIUE right now, and so became the head coach at Edwardsville High School. I've never worked anywhere else. I got hired right out of college in Edwardsville to teach and coach. So this is really all I know, and it's been a very rewarding job. It's my wife and I really enjoy the community. Edwardsville, as most people will probably know, we got a university in town, so there's a kind of a small town feel, but there's bigger city amenities and conveniences, and our kids all live here and go to school in Edwardsville, and it's just been a great place to raise a family and then to work and coach in the same town you live in. I think is very rewarding as well. So just kind of started out as an assistant and one foot in front of the other, and learned a lot from Coach Waldo, and took on a big job. And it certainly has its challenges. There's no doubt. But our program is one that I would tell people is one that we just continue to hopefully carry on the tradition that was set long before me in the history of Edwardsville High School athletics. Overall I would say one of the top athletic programs in the state. If you look at our girls sports and our boys sports, basketball program is just kind of a small part of that, but our tradition is big all the way back to guys like Manny Jackson, who played at the University of Illinois in the Hall of Fame at the U of I is named after Manny Jackson. And then there's some legendary coaches, as I mentioned, in there as well. So it's a big responsibility. I feel like I'm more of a caretaker of a program than I am just a head coach, trying to just uphold the standard that was set long before me. And it's been an honor to be the coach, and I'm certainly we'll get into more of that. But I've only been in Edwardsville, and I have no plans of going anywhere else anytime soon. So we're just happy to be here and feel very fortunate to get to coach the players that we do.
So let's really delve into you spent 13 years as an assistant and 7 years as a JV coach all in one place, which let's be honest, coach, is pretty rare today.
Yeah.
So maybe take our listeners through, those lessons in 13 years and learning from a Hall of Fame coach and kind of the things you did to prepare yourself because, we have a lot of listeners that are, aspiring young coaches that want to be a head coach.
Yeah, and I hope I could speak to those guys because I certainly, in some ways, still feel like I am one of those guys. Although I'm 43 now, but I graduated from University of Illinois in 2005 and played for a good high school coach, Scott Oatman at Mascoutah. We were competitive, and I knew of Mike Waldo just from the name and growing up in the area, but I really hadn't spent much time in Edwardsville. But my brother, who's now the athletic director of Mascoutah, he was actually coaching and teaching at Edwardsville first. So I'm in Champaign and I'm getting ready to graduate, and he called me and said, Edwardsville has some openings. Why don't you apply? Dr. Ed Hightower was our superintendent at the time. So a very sports driven leader of a school district. Obviously, he's a Big Ten referee, Big Ten official. And it just happened really quick. I went in and did a kind of a casual interview with his assistant superintendent, and then met with him and got offered a teaching job. And they didn't have any stipend basketball positions open at the time, but that didn't matter to me at all. I just introduced myself to Coach Waldo one day my brother connected us. And volunteer assistant coach for freshman sophomore for a year with who's now our assistant superintendent. Alan Duncan was a good friend of mine. He was the head freshman coach. I just offered to help him, and I realized very quickly after watching one Mike Waldo practice that I knew very little about not only basketball, but I knew very little about leadership and organization. And so I really just made up my mind that I wanted to learn as much as I could. And obviously, if you're a teacher and you're basically a student when you're a teacher, you're still learning. So I've always been eager to learn. And it just was a great fit to have a guy like him in charge of a program. My first year, and I was just low man on the totem pole, but we had a really, really good varsity team that year. We went to the state tournament. It was Elite Eight back then. There was only 2 classes. We had a point guard named Spencer Stewart and EJ Jones, and Dustin McGuire was an all-stater. So my first year, I'm around this incredible team. I know nothing. And Coach Waldo asked me to start doing some scouting. And I was luckily paired up with a guy, Kevin Parr, who I still teach with. But I came back with just a few notes thinking I could tell him they played man-to-man defense and tell him a couple things about what they did on offense. And he starts asking me a bunch of questions, extremely detailed questions that I have no answer for any of them. I remember I had like 1 through 5 on my scout notes, like here's the point guard, number 1. And right away he was positive with me, but he was frustrated because I didn't have the actual numbers of the players. He wanted to know where number 10 was and number 20 was. And he started asking me about switching defenses, and if we have this player guard this action, what are they going to do? And I quickly realized he wanted basically the game on videotape on a yellow notepad, and I was nowhere ready for that. And I think he knew that. I think that was part of the process. I think he knew I was eager to learn. I would tell any young coach, if you want to learn basketball, obviously, if you can work for a Hall of Fame coach, it helps. But scouting, we were in-person scouting back then. We were everything on paper. Every possession, he wanted to know the set play or the action. He wanted to know personnel. He wanted to know, what their strengths and weaknesses were, what types of defenses, out of timeout actions, out of bound actions. And I did that, and I think was the most beneficial thing I've done in my career was scouting. And you just get to see how everybody else does things as well. And then when you go back and share your notes with a guy like Coach Waldo, he's asking you questions, so you have to think about your notes, and then he's asking about our personnel at Edwardsville. Who were Spencer Stewart guard? Do we need to double the post? Do we need can Triggs guard the post without doubling? He's firing these types of questions at me, and I'm just hanging in there trying to not embarrass myself most of the time. But I really got on volunteering, and then the following year, the 8th grade job came open at one of our middle schools. So we're a unit school district. So I became a head coach of an 8th grade, but I still was helping out at the high school and still doing all the scouting. So I think almost in a perfect world for a young guy, you're in charge of your own team, you're planning your own practice, you're coaching games, but you're still learning because you're scouting every Tuesday and Friday. The negative is you never get to see your own varsity team play, but I was really immersed in basketball in that I was coaching practice, organizing my own practice. Getting to try some things where the expectations were different and there's not everybody watching you at the 8th grade level, and then interacting with him on a regular basis. And then as soon as our season was done at the middle school, I would be up with the high school team for the last 4 to 6 weeks. So I did that for about 5 or 6 years. And then, as you mentioned, the JV head job came open, and he had kind of talked to me about moving up to that spot when it was available, when a spot opened up. And so then I was just immersed in varsity basketball right under his wing. And one great thing about Coach Waldo, and I would say I still think I'm a little bit crazy for agreeing to take over for a guy as successful as him, but what's weird about that dynamic is I only felt prepared because I had worked for him. So on one hand, you're taking over for a guy that was unbelievable. You seem crazy, but you also seem prepared because you worked for him. And then he was great at letting his coaches coach. I mean, he coached coaches just as well as he coached players. And so he gave us a lot of autonomy in games to make adjustments and give him suggestions. He was very open to suggestions and ideas. Now, you had to do the work. You had to be in the film room with him. You had to be in practice with him. But, for a coach is successful, 700 wins, we're in a regional final, and he might turn around and say, do you want to keep guarding like this, or do you want to change defenses, or do you want to switch our scheme? And you say something because you feel kind of empowered to do so. So I was confident that I could become a head coach because I had been volunteer coach, 8th grade head coach, JV coach, varsity assistant, and he had us doing so many things. And then I would tell young guys, don't be bashful and shy to run your underclass program or your middle school program like you're a varsity head coach. So I remember people looking at me kind of crazy. I would film our 8th grade games. And even my athletic director at the time at the middle school was like, what are you doing filming games? And it wasn't a big deal, but I just knew that was what I was going to do when I was a varsity coach. So why not do that now? And we did an end of the season big banquet as an 8th grade coach because I saw Coach Waldo do that on a bigger scale. And so we had a fundraiser. We did summer camp. So I really did those things when I was an 8th grade coach, kind of modeled after Coach Waldo, so that if the opportunity presented itself, I at least had tried those things. And being an assistant coach at Edwardsville for Coach Waldo, I had some opportunities to become a head coach at a younger age. In fact, I got my first call. I'd only been an assistant in Edwardsville for 3 years. When I was really young. A smaller school in the area offered me a head coaching job. I just felt I wasn't ready, and I just had so much more to learn. And I'm so glad I just kept being an assistant coach. And I would still be an assistant coach for Coach Waldo. I had no Didn't have to be a head coach. My wife, like I said, we really liked living in Edwardsville. And so I was just happy to be a part of a winning program and learning a lot every day. And Coach Wald and I still talk weekly and during the season. More than that, just still learning from him. But fortunate to work with a guy like him. And I could spend the whole podcast just talking about him and what a role model and mentor, what a fine human being he is, and how he's impacted my life in such a positive way. And I've had the good fortune of being able to tell him that in person, but I will always be so gracious to him and another coach, Brian Wilkinson, that was a longtime assistant with him that I still talk to quite a bit. So I've been in Edwardsville, like you said, never left, but I feel like Edwardsville kind of raised me as a professional, both as a teacher and a coach. And like I said, I was hired by Dr. Hightower, and he was a mentor for me in a lot of ways. So to be hired by a guy like that and then work for a guy like Mike Waldo has just been a extremely fortunate circumstance. And it all started because my brother happened to be teaching here and they had an opening, and I just kind of jumped in and just did as much as I could to bring value to the group. And that'd be the last thing. If there's a young guy out there listening, just how can you bring value to the group? I think sometimes we want to be in the big spotlight, but there's certainly a process to that. And so I just, scouting, if that's what he wanted me to do, that's what I was going to do. So I would just encourage those young guys to try not to skip steps, just like you wouldn't want your players to skip steps, in like a player development process. And then I'm still don't always feel prepared, but I went through the steps, and it was certainly something where I feel like I earned my stripes, and then was obviously given an opportunity of a lifetime.
So you mentioned your brother and being the AD of Mascuda. I guess we just kind of want to pick your brain a little bit. He's obviously an AD, and obviously he's your brother, so you guys are talking. But how
Yeah.
does that kind of help you? I guess maybe keep up on current events or things that are going on, or bounce ideas off of him that you're thinking, along with your AD and your administration, obviously. But
Yeah.
to kind of navigate the challenges of having a program, right, at a big school, whether it be, how we're doing tryouts, or,
Right.
maybe ideas for fundraising, different things like that, almost the non-basketball stuff, right? That takes up a
Yeah.
lot of a head coach's time. But how
Yeah.
do you kind of use him and obviously other mentors to come up with those ideas and kind of put things together on a yearly basis?
Yeah, it's a good point that he's an athletic director, so I think people would think, well, you wouldn't talk too much about basketball. And to be honest, he's a very dynamic leader, and so you're talking a lot about leadership. If I make a call to him, it may not be about X's and O's, but it may be a program thing, or it may be some way of, like you said, even fundraising. My brother, he's a very outside the box thinker. He's very charismatic. He brings a lot of positive attention to his athletic program and a lot of positive attention to the athletes in his program and his coaches. And so there's a lot of things that I've gotten from him, especially from like a social media branding standpoint. I think he's a master at that type of stuff, but just the leadership stuff. And then you're also blessed. He's your brother, so he's going to tell you the truth. Sometimes you need to be told the truth. If you have a great idea that he might remind you is not, sometimes Coach Wall would always say, you're either a genius or an idiot. If you're doing something no one else has done before, you're either the most innovative genius in the world or you're an idiot. That's why nobody else is doing it. And so having some honest people in your circle is good too. And Scott is certainly that. I mean, we grew up, shared a bedroom our whole life, and grew up in a very competitive household. So, we were those typical brothers battling in the backyard. He's 3 years older than me. And as I mentioned, I ended up in Edwardsville because of him. And then he went back home to work there. But we text or talk probably daily. But he gets it, and I think he knows what coaches go through. Which, like you said, my athletic director Amy Bolascolo does as well. She's very supportive. But at the end of the day, sometimes it's nice to hear from your brother. And he's going to tell you the truth. He really, really cares. My wife would laugh. He's my biggest fan. She's probably right there with him, but he's the first one to brag about me when anytime there's something we do well. He's sometimes I think oversells me a little bit to people, but we're best friends, and I think that was the way our family kind of nurtured us. But he's a truth teller. He's supportive, but he understands, I think, what coaches go through. And being an athletic director, he sees the pressures. He sees some of the parent conversations you have to have, some of the player conversations you have to have. And so, no, it's a unique situation for your brother to be in that role. I think we would talk anyways, just because he's my brother. But the fact that he's the athletic director leading a program, I think he gets, like you said, all the other stuff that goes into a program. So yeah, he's an unbelievable resource for me. And it's a daily communication with him and I, a lot of times about things that are going on in his program, or certainly my basketball program.
So I want to talk about that first season because, you take over for a legend. Todd and I do our homework. The first season might not have been the greatest from a wins-loss standpoint.
Yeah.
We've talked to a lot of guests about the idea of imposter syndrome and kind of take us through, because I know my first year as head coach we were 11 and 20, and I know how I felt. So maybe take us through those challenges just as that first year head coach taking over for a legend, and maybe what you learned about yourself from that.
Yeah, it was really tough. I mean, if you look at the win-loss record, especially at a place like Edwardsville where they had so big, so we had just a couple years prior to that, we had Mark Smith and AJ Epinesa, and we were ranked number one in the state for most of that season and lost in the super sectional to Simeon. And then the year right before I took over, we had Jack Marinko, who was an all-stater, and I think we had won 18 or 19 games and just completely flipped on us. And we knew we were going to have some challenges. We graduated everybody from the year before, and then at the same time, our league had EJ Liddell. I think we had 4 or 5 all-state players. Alton was really good. Bevel West was really good. So it was you could say bad timing or good timing, but we happened to be down a little bit, and the league was unbelievable. But at the same time, I felt like we're very process oriented, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. But what we wanted to make sure we established was the expectation and the day to day. And so we weren't idiots. Bevel West ended up winning a state championship that year. We were going to have our hands full, but we were going to make sure we practiced for Bevel West those 2 days leading up to that game like we could win. And you have a plan, and you hold your players accountable for that plan. We ended up being able to hold EJ Liddell, I think, to 6 points and 8 points in 2 games. We played them. Now they hurt us in a lot of ways, but I think our players still took pride because we had something to do every day. And we had a process where we were trying to get better every day. And I think we saw little wins as we were losing. I think you still see players getting better. You still see the game plan being carried out. You see some optimism there. And then the following year, we had a much better year. But I always told those guys from that first team that a lot of our success thereafter was because of those guys. That first year, they still dug their heels in and were committed. So we were felt like we were doing things the right way. It just wasn't necessarily resulting in wins, but the players had uh, believed in what we were doing, and I felt like it set us up for success down the road. But no, it's not easy, and I think when you worry as a coach that you're going to get to December, January, and as you're losing, the players still going to be hanging on to every word you said, and we felt like they were. So we felt like we were still winning in that way. And then talking to Coach Waldo, he thought it was great. I mean, I think he felt bad for me that we were losing, but he said, you'd much rather be a young coach and have to squeeze every ounce out of it, figure out a way every game to try to give your players a chance to win, than to inherit, like he joked, well, your first year could have been Mark Smith and AJ Epinesa, and then you think winning's easy because you got, 2 of the best players you've ever had, 2 all-staters, one guy's still playing. One guy's a starting defensive end for the Buffalo Bills, the other guy's playing in Japan professionally. That could have been my first year. And then you're managing those expectations and you're probably unsure of that. You don't maybe have to have the best execution or maybe the best defensive scheme because your athletes are really, really good. And then from there on out, you think it's easier. You don't prepare and you don't do this. So he did often talk to me about that this is going to be really hard, but this is going to make you figure out real quick how to do things. And you're going to have to really strategize. You're going to have to really practice every day. You're going to have to also get your players better. And so it's a blessing in disguise. It's tough. I don't want to act like there wasn't some dog nights there, the dog days when you're down and out because you're just fighting and you can't figure out a way to win, especially close games. But I don't think we were ever discouraged. I just think we realized that's life in the Southwestern Conference. And like I said, I think that group kind of put in motion some success that we eventually ended up having.
So, obviously you talked about you're replacing the Hall of Fame coach, multiple state trophies, but at the same time, right? You're only the 4th coach in the last 55 years, which to me speaks to culture and tradition. And to this day and age, it's kind of crazy, really, when you think about it. It's almost probably unheard of, right? I don't know if you could go through many schools that had that. So, kind of what is it about program and the school that has kind of led to that tradition and culture, like I said, being so rare at a lot of schools?
Yeah, first thing I would say is sports mean a lot to the people in Edwardsville and basketball particularly, but sports in general. And Edwardsville is an interesting place. We have a lot of kids that move in here as well as grow up here. And so it has a good brand for surrounding communities. Families are moving to St. Louis to get parents are getting a job in St. Louis. This is a great place to live. So you have that feel with the university here and lots of diversity and people moving in and out, but there's a strong, hometown feeling, and we have families that are 3, 4 generations now at Edwardsville High School. And so I think basketball has always been valued. I mentioned Manny Jackson in, even 1950s and 1960s. Like you said, I think there's only been 3 or 4 coaches since Manny Jackson, which is crazy to think about. But the community is sports driven, and then the expectations are good, high, and then the support has to be there. And what I mean by support is the administration going to make sure you have good assistant coaches? Is your administration going to make sure your facilities are high quality? Are they going to make sure your team always has a place to practice? And I think one challenge in Edwardsville, in a good way, is that all of our sports are valued, and so I certainly don't feel like I get any sort of special treatment. I think they want to see all of our sports do all this community values, academics, and athletics. But certainly we're held to a high standard and then supported in that way. Like I said, from a facility standpoint and from personnel standpoint and hiring coaches. You certainly can't do it by yourself. You need it. You need assistant coaches. You need strong support. But those families, there's been families in Edwardsville that are here long before me. I've had the good fortune of there's been second and third generation. Like I said, Clark Smith, for example, maybe the best player we've had ever, and certainly the best player I've gotten to coach. Was an assistant when he was here. Ended up being Mr. Basketball. His parents both played at SIUE, so they were great college players. They had all these wonderful, beautiful, athletic children, which was great, and they just set roots here. So the university has kind of added to that, and that some of our families are that way. I mentioned the Epanesses earlier. Mom grew up in Edwardsville. She played volleyball, Iowa Wesleyan. She met a man from America Samoa. He plays football at Iowa. They graduate. They move back to Edwardsville, where her roots were settled. They have all these kids. Epanes's oldest sister was an All-American. She was a volleyball player at Purdue, and then obviously had AJ. And so these families have just kind of set roots here. And so those families understand the expectations. Then we don't really have to train our kids on what life is like at Edwardsville High School. They come in knowing that we're going to be really demanding. They come in knowing that there's a lot of work to do. And then I would say within our program, we intentionally want to be the most demanding thing that these kids ever do. I don't apologize for having high expectations. We don't apologize for having a long 2-hour, 45-minute practices, walkthroughs. We prepare at a high level. We want it to be a challenge, and we want our kids to go through our program and feel like they really did something with their time. And then I think, to build on your question, that adds to it as well, because you have former players feeling really good about the program. I have two former players on my staff right now that were excellent players for us. We have our alumni guys always coming back, checking on our program. And so, as you mentioned, it was established long before I was here, but I do feel like a caretaker of the program. It's more sometimes than a head coach. I try to keep those connections alive and invite those old guys back, give credit to our former coaches for building our program, and make sure that everyone always feels a part of our program. And even when we're not winning, championships, they still feel good about the experience. They still feel good about the work that we did. And do we make them feel like they were a part of something special, which I think is at the end of the day, as a head coach, is ultimately what you want the players. People sometimes ask me, I was on a podcast last year, he said, how do you know your program's in a good place? And I said, I think the ultimate answer is how the players that just went through it feel about it. Do they come back and check on the young guys? Do they still follow your games? Do they send you a text when you win a big game? Do they still check in? Do they offer to help? And we have that happen all the time. As I said, former players coaching with us. And so, to me, as long as our players that played in our program feel good about it and our community feels good about it, then I think we're doing a pretty good job.
So before we kind of switch topics here, halftime adjustments, and we'll go basketball here and just talk about kind of how you approach the summer, your kind of goals, what you're trying to get accomplished, what you're doing here leading up to it in the last couple of days to make sure we got, you got everything running smoothly. And then maybe how have you kind of maybe adapted and changed, right, over the years with some things in your summer program? Obviously, you lost some days, right? You got now, so you got to adjust to that. But just kind of some of those things of like where you're going into the summer, and then maybe some things over the years that you've kind of done differently to help your program.
We're going to hit the ground running. We get 20 days now, as you said, in June. And so we will start right away. And we'll use all of them in June. A decent amount of our players play with their club teams in July, and we like to be able to give them the opportunity to do that. So we'll use all of our days in June. We will mix it with practices and then scrimmages and then actual shootouts and events. And summer is huge for us. From a coaching standpoint, we're looking to find who our 5, 6, 7 best players are. And it's not always perfect because we have some multi-sport kids who won't be able to be at everything, but we're always trying to tweak how we play. Our system is always going to depend on our personnel. We're going to always modify how we play, off of what our players' strengths are. So it's really twofold this summer. What are our players capable of doing? What are their strengths? And then how can we adapt our system to fit those strengths? And so last summer, for example, our point guard, Herbert Martin, just had a really good year for us, ended up being an all-stater, second team IBCA all-state guy. But he started to really come into his own last summer. So last June, we started seeing her really impact games in a lot of ways. And he had some good moments as a junior. He started for us and played every game. But so then in the summer, we started changing some of the offensive actions, some more two-man actions and some get actions with him to make him feel more comfortable in our offense. And so, you're looking for those personnel type of things and adjustments as a coaching staff, but ultimately, who can compete? The young guys always want to or think they can, but for a lot of them, it's the first time they're being guarded by an 18-year-old guy or a 17-year-old guy. And so it's great for us as staff. And I would say one big thing we've changed in the summer of the last 3 or 4 years, we've included our younger guys sooner. I always felt like we focused all of our attention on JV and varsity, and we sometimes lost touch with some of those younger guys. And we had them come to some things, but they weren't fully immersed in Tiger basketball. They're going to be all in this summer. And some of that is now we have the staff now to be able to do that. You want to make sure you can coach all the kids that show up. But we'll throw our freshmen. We're excited about our young guys. We'll throw them right in the mix and try to get them as much up to speed as we can in those 20 days. So we've changed that. And then just in big program changes. I think I would say the blueprint is still similar, probably to Coach Waldo in a lot of ways. But you're certainly putting your own personality on things. In today's day and age, you have to be a little more flexible with some things. I think you have to understand that we want kids to play other sports, so we certainly encourage that. I was probably a lot more rigid my first year or two in certain ways. I think we still have certain standards that are the same, but I'm more willing to talk to a junior or a senior. I have a conversation with them if they need to miss something or they have another sporting thing they want to go to. But I also think some of those guys have earned their stripes, and so you get a little more of a benefit of the doubt if you're Herbert Martin and you've been in our program for 4 years and you've never missed a practice and you need to go somewhere, and you have a little bit of a different standard for some of those guys because you trust them. And so trust is big. I think I've learned to trust the players more, and I think I've learned to open myself up more to them. I would say you always think about the X's and O's when you're going to want to be a head coach. You're thinking about being a head coach. I think one area I try to continue to improve in and hope I've gotten better at is your emotional IQ. Is managing the kids. Kids have a lot on their plate these days. It's different. Social media is different. They're getting sometimes, I don't know if recruited is the right word, but they're getting pulled in other directions to maybe check out other schools or other club teams or other situations. So you have to really have a trust there with them. They have to really feel like you're for them. They have to really feel like you want them to do well both on and off the court. But that trust takes time, and sometimes that's tricky. So, like I said, including those young guys sooner so you can get to know them a little bit earlier, finding ways to build a relationship with them. And even though it's competitive and we're going to be on them, are you able to, let them know in other ways that you're for them? And you may not always be able to tell them what they want to hear. So I think we've adapted culturally some understanding these kids have a lot on their plate. They see a lot of things on social media. How can we get them to trust us? And Coach Waldo was awesome, but he was freshman, sophomore year. Most of our guys would tell you they were scared to death of him. He would always joke and laugh that the most successful organization in the history of the world is the United States military. So let's just do everything like the United States military does it. And he certainly has a point in a lot of ways, but the kids don't necessarily want to take orders anymore. I mean, I think a lot of them still will. But they have to. They want to know what's in it for them, and they want to trust you. And so I think we've tried to figure out ways to do that maybe sooner or earlier. I think juniors and seniors most of the time when they get to you, they just want to win. We had a really good group this year. They just wanted to win. They were a selfless group, but it's a process to get there. And so I think we've changed some things to make those guys feel like they can trust us, even though our demands are high. And like I said, we'll really start implementing all of that this June as a coaching staff and kind of seeing what we have.
All right, so as we get to the second half of the episode, this is fascinating because you wrote essentially a love letter, and I kind of read some of the newspaper article about it, but I'm I'm just curious. First of all, maybe what made you want to write it, and kind of where did the inspiration come from?
Yeah, it's a little bit embarrassing. It's been a very positive thing, but to be honest, it's a little bit embarrassing because I never intended for it to be a big thing. One is I'm a little bit shy still with social media. And you talked about my brother earlier. I think that's one big difference between him and I. He's great at all that stuff. I never want to come off as a self-promoter. I think as a leader of an organization, you never want to make it about yourself. I've tried to use social media to promote our players more than I would ever use it to promote myself. But we had a special year and we had a special group of guys. With that, you have a lot of families that are invested, and I'm in the locker room talking to my players. So that wasn't the challenge, but people are invested. People are following along. And I just felt like when the game was over in that next 24 to 48 hours, like there's a lot of things you either did say to your team that you still want to say to others that you may not have the opportunity to do that. And you also want people to know that it's okay. And so with social media, I think you're almost like a cliffhanger. And my wife had posted, throughout the season, our record, and my son is very much a part of our team, so she'd post pictures of him, and so you get kind of a following in a way of not just the guys in your locker room, but people that maybe don't live right here that are following along, and so certainly they could read online that we lost in a regional final at Alton, but to me there was so much more to it, and I didn't want people to think that I thought it was a failure. I wanted people to realize that this is why you coach. The year that we had is why you coach, the ups and the downs, the process, the players, the relationships. And so my wife and I, like the day before, had just been talking about, I think I had probably made fun of someone, to be honest, that posted something on social media. And she always kind of corrects me when I say something that's maybe out of bounds or whatnot. And she said, honestly, that's a great way for people to maybe see how you actually feel, and it's a great way to communicate with a large group, and people should take advantage of that. And so we kind of joked about it, and so I was in my basement, it was like 10:30 at night, and I'd been getting some text messages from my guys. It was emotional. I mean, I don't cry much, but we cried, and I got some hugs from some parents at Alton in the lobby, and certainly some of our players, and I just felt like it warranted some sort of closure to not only our players but to the community, and it just kind of came out naturally, just something you kind of start typing away on your phone, and then it's one of those things that you hit submit on, and then you kind of have like this weird feeling, maybe I should delete that, and I just immediately started getting likes and notifications, and I really just wanted people to learn more about our team, and I really wanted people to understand that we were okay. We were certainly down, and Coach Dudley and Alton played a great game. I didn't want anybody to make excuses or think we lost because of this or because of that. We just lost. That's what happens in sports. We really prepared well. They just played better than we did. And so I wanted to draw the attention back to the players and the season that we had and how grateful. Ultimately, I just wanted people to realize I was grateful for this group. Coaching is hard. I realize that not every year will be like this. And I just wanted to draw attention to the year we had, but mostly to the people that we had, and just let them know that I loved them and that it was going to be okay.
That's awesome. I mean, I think I personally, as a coach, think that's one of the hardest parts, the end of the year, right?
Yeah.
Because you got guys and girls who put in a lot of work for you for 4 years, and
Yeah.
recognizing them and making sure they're appreciated.
Yeah.
That's
Well, thank you. I wish people could see it. And the locker room, you guys get it, but the locker room is a sacred place. And one tradition that we have that Coach Waldorf, I just stole from him, is we let our seniors talk after our last game. So we usually bring them, like this year it was at Alton. So we get out of there, get on the bus. But when we get back to the high school, we go in the locker room and our seniors talk to the whole team and to the coaches. One is it's hard getting up in front of people and talking in general is hard, but it's so fulfilling because you go through these growing pains with these kids, and you get them when they're 14, 15 years old, and they don't always agree with you, and they don't always understand why you're pushing them. They don't always understand why they think they should be starting and they're the seventh man or the eighth man. And each of our seniors, we had 4 seniors this year, they had all gone through 30 seconds. Like Herbert Martin became an all-stater, but thought about how hard it was his sophomore and junior year, and he was down in the dumps, and he went through a lot of stuff, and he's off the court. He's just been exceptional, but he went through growth. And so you're thinking about that. Yosef Epinesa is an All-American football player. He's going to the University of Iowa. Didn't have to play basketball. He just loved his teammates. He struggled a little bit his sophomore year. It was not easy for him. So his story is unique. Bryce Pryor wanted to play more last year. Wasn't getting the minutes that he wanted. Fought every day. He's 5'8", 9", if I'm giving him a few inches, but he's just a fighter. He's a competitor. And then Brandon Hoffman is a kid that just does whatever you want. Plays 5 minutes a game, maybe 8 minutes a game if someone's in foul trouble. Practices hard every day. So my point is, I could go on about those 4 guys, but they deserve a chance to talk. And so when they step up and talk about that growth, and they hug coaches, and they tell other young men that they love them, I don't think that's normal in a good way. And I think that's why we coach, those moments. And those are the guys, like I said, that end up feeling really good, and they each have their story, and you just are so proud of the journey. And it's, like I said, it's very rewarding. And I wish it's something everyone could see. I tell their moms and dads, like, we get to see them at their best. as a parenting is really hard. We get to see them at their best. And I just wanted to share a little bit of that spotlight on those guys with anybody that was able to read that message. And the newspaper took it and published it. I had no intention of the newspaper running it, so it became a little bit bigger than I intended. But I hope it made people realize how special those 4 seniors were and how special this group was.
And you're giving your guys a couple inches. They're gonna like that.
Yeah.
Got to bump them up, right? Got to give them the program, right?
Yeah, that's right, man. We always exaggerate a couple inches.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk about just kind of the process of the season, right? You have a team that's on a winning streak, playing well. What are some of the things you're doing to keep that balance, right? Not get too high, right? And keep working on that process, because like you said, any given day, right? A really good team.
Right. I think it starts off season. We graduated our 2 leading scorers. The guy that would have been our leading scorer actually transferred. I went back home to the town he grew up in. So I think the first thing you have to do is establish a culture where you still think you can be good. And you have to do that through player development. I think you have to make your guys work in the weight room in the summer. And so we had lost some guys. And so I think the funny thing was there weren't much expectations from outside people. But we had a really good summer. We competed, we beat some teams, and as we were playing teams, I mentioned my point guard, Herbert Martin. He just turned a couple of games on his head. We played Pinckneyville, who's a really storied program in the South, and Matt Lauer's the coach. He's a great guy. He used to coach at SIUE, so him and I know each other. And we beat them pretty good, and not because they're not great, but Herb just completely disrupted the game. Like their point guard couldn't get him into offense, and we didn't have Epinesa at all in June because he's a football guy. But we started seeing positives, and as a coaching staff, I think we thought we could be pretty competitive. And so that process, right, where you're just preparing to win, whether you got everybody back, whether you lose some guys, whether you got Epinesa in the summer, like we're trying to compete all the time. And so that part is always there. And then the season starts and you feel pretty good about things, but certainly you don't have any idea that you're going to win, 28 games. And we won the Thanksgiving tournament at St. Anthony, and same thing. Herb had a really exceptional tournament. Micah Butler he's a junior for us, had a good tournament. So you're starting to see some pieces fit. You're excited about we were always excited about the vibe, the way the guys played, the way the guys enjoyed each other, the unselfishness. We certainly knew that was good. But then you start your first Southwestern Conference game at Alton, and you get beat. And so you go, well, here we go. This is life in the Southwestern Conference. And I would have probably been shocked if you'd have told me we wouldn't have lost another Southwestern Conference game after that first one. So we literally lost our first Southwestern Conference game and then ran the table. But it's just the day to day. It's the process. You lose at Alton. You got to remind them that there's a long season ahead, and then you have to get right back to work. I think the way we practice is very preparation based. In other words, we are always focused on the next opponent. So when our players, let's say Tuesday, Friday, so we lose Tuesday night, when they come into practice on Wednesday, it's completely flipped the script. It's Belleville East notes or Belleville West notes or East St. Louis notes. And we certainly will always talk the first 5 or 10 minutes. I got a notepad of all the notes I took while watching film. We'll go over a few things, and that practice will be designed to fix some of our mistakes. But at the same time, we're already talking about the next opponent. And so I think giving your players something to focus on immediately after a loss is good. And so our practices don't change, based off, oh, it's a really big game on a Friday. And we often talk. Eric Smith is one of my assistants, and he was the head coach at Alton for a long time, and now he's with me, but he was a great head coach and a very good assistant coach. He will always tell our guys the Southwestern Conference Championship is won on Tuesday nights. Because Friday nights are going to be fun. There's going to be 2,000 people, 3,000 people. There's going to be, a lot of times college coaches at those games, scouting players. Like everybody can get up for a Friday night at East St. Louis or a Friday night at O'Fallon. Like, can you get up on Tuesday at Collinsville? Maybe there's only 500 people there. And so we always kind of try to set that standard with how we practice. Practice the same. We're going to play, in the Effingham St. Anthony tournament, if you're going to play Rand tool, our guy, you can't trick guys these days. I do. I'm envious of coaches like before the internet. Like our guys can look teams up. They can look up their record. They can look up if they got good players. Coach Waldo was a master at making everybody sound like they were like the Showtime Lakers, and we'd be playing like Granite City, and he'd have our guys convinced that Granite City was the best high school basketball team in the world. It's a little bit harder these days because of the internet. So do you have a process in place that when your guys think they should beat this team by 15 points, they still practice the same way and they're still focused on their details? You have to manage that some. So you're taking it day by day. I know that sounds cliche, but I think you support that with the habits. Do you have a plan in practice? And then I think you're also analytically driven some, showing them some things we could have done better. Even when you're winning, you're still showing them. A big thing for us is in our league is limiting turnovers and try to win the field goal percentage battle. So we're looking at those things. We're talking about shot selection all the time, but It's a day-to-day habit. You just look up and all of a sudden you've won 20 games and you're starting to realize you're pretty good. You do have to manage people telling you how great you are. I think I always thought we won a big Christmas tournament. And we started realizing then that we were pretty good, and everybody's telling you that you're pretty good. And I don't think you can tell players to ignore that. We're all humans. We all like praise. We all like positive attention. I think what you do with your players is you remind them why you're good. We are good. We just won the MICDS tournament. Here's why we did it. We held this team to 40 points. We guarded their best player. We held him to 6 points. We shot 80% from free throws. We had 6 turns. No, whatever that thing that you are valuing, you have to remind them why you are good. You're not just good. You didn't just show up good. You're good because you play hard together. And I would have a lot of coaches, in the pregame, you're talking to other coaches, and they would say things like, man, on film, I love how you guys play. On film, I can tell that you guys care about each other. And I would tell my players that a lot of times it shows on film how much you care about each other. So I don't think you can lie to them anymore. I don't think you can say, hey, we're not good. We've done nothing. We've done nothing. Well, we have done something. We've won some tough games in the Southwestern Conference. So I just think you kind of embrace it, but you make sure they understand that we are good because of you and what you're doing every day. And as long as you can keep them on that, I think you can manage those high expectations as they continue to snowball, and very process oriented. And we had good senior leadership, I think, to help manage that as well.
All right, so I kind of want to flip it. So now it's the end, it's a tough loss, or a couple losses in a row. One, I'm going to kind of do a two-parter here. One, how do you handle that personally? Or how do you get the athletes to continue to buy in?
Really good questions. I think the buy-in comes down to leadership. I think the best coaches are the best teachers and the best leaders. And so if you're going to try to teach, I always talk to our staff about, teaching through the mistakes, coaching through the mistakes, and then lead them to be who you want them to be. Coach Waldo was adamant that you never complain about your players. And we're all human. So that doesn't mean you don't ever look at your assistant coach and go, I wish he could make a shot. Certainly we have those moments, but you never blame them, because ultimately you are in charge of them. If they're not playing well, then it could be your fault as the coach. Do you have them doing things they're not great at? Have you created a defensive scheme where you can hide your worst defensive player? Do you have an offense where you're getting your best shooter open shot? So the point of that is leadership a lot of times is taking personal accountability and being able to teach the kids, why are they not making those shots, or why are you having these breakdowns on defense? And so for me, individual, how do I handle it? It's my wife would tell you it's a ridiculous amount of film work. I don't know any different because Coach Waldo set that standard for me. So Tuesday night game, let's say we lose a Tuesday night game to Bevel East. We get back at the high school at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. I'm going to watch the game that we just played against Bevel East and try to note some things, probably watch it twice. And then I'm going to watch 2 games of our next opponents. There's probably 4 hours of film after the game. And then you're going to spend probably another hour or two. You're going to teach U.S. history at 7:05 in the morning. That's when we start. 7:15 in the morning. You're going to fire up. You're going to fire up and be excited that the Americans beat the Japanese, and you're going to teach about that and your patriotic message. But in the back of your mind, you're worried about practice at 2 o'clock. But you do all of that before school, and so that you can spend that hour practicing, planning practice, and making sure you have a plan. And so for me, individually as a leader, I have to figure out, what did we do good? What did we do wrong? I got a bunch of notes in my notebook. And then what do I need to communicate with my players, and what do I not need to communicate with them? They don't need to know everything that we did wrong. They need to know a few things that we can fix quick. And as a staff, then we got some long-term things you may need to fix. And so you have your notes of things you want to hit right away the next day. And then I think you bury that loss by having a plan moving forward. It doesn't mean we don't have moments where I'm frustrated and I'm upset because we didn't execute something we've practiced, but ultimately you have to take accountability for how your team performed, and you have to find a way to get them to see what they individually can do to be better. You talked about buy-in. I heard a coach one time, he said, we don't talk much about buy-in, we talk about believe in. And I do think a buy-in almost gives them like an option. I think if they believe in it, then they're just going to show up on Wednesday and in a somewhat of a way do what you tell them to do, because they believe in what you're doing with them. It's not easy. I'm not saying that we have some magic button that we press, but by having standards in place and having a process of, Wednesday, we lost last night. Here's why we lost. You guys are going to go over there with Coach Roundtree, and we turned it over 3 times in traps. So we're going to spend the first 2 minutes. You 4 guys are going to go over there and play out of traps. I'm going to take our 2 3-point shooters. We only shot 30% last night. I think I know why. We shot some deep ones. We shot some rush ones. So we're going to go over here to the shooting machine. I'm going to work with you. And Coach Smith's going to take you 3 guys because your closeouts were terrible. My point is we can tell them they messed up, and we do, but I think you have to provide them then the opportunity to correct it. And if you do those things, the buy-in is going to be there because they feel like you want them to do well and you're providing them the opportunity to do so. If you just complain, you guys can't make a shot, we can't guard anybody. We all have those moments. There's certainly times during a game where I think we're the worst basketball team that's ever played. And I think you lose them if you just throw out those descriptors without a plan to fix them. And then I think the big thing is the players feeling good about the work still. So in other words, we lost, but did we prepare? And if you didn't, then maybe you can point that out. But there's still some silver linings and some tough losses. And then I think the ultimate grind. This is not a knock on other coaches, but I think basketball is the ultimate grind because the season's long. It's in the dead of winter, so it's going to be dark when you get out of practice. So you're trying to still uplift them in some ways, but be demanding, but have a plan to put that loss behind you, and then flip the script and get them ready for the next one. And like you said, you might lose that one too. It's certainly in the Southwestern Conference that can happen, but you have to, as the leader, find a way to continue to move forward, addressing things as they come up, but also having a vision for the team, being process oriented and letting them know that we're still maybe doing some things well. We just may be having a hard time winning these games. So here's our plan in practice to fix those things and give us the best chance to win.
So I'm gonna tweak this one a little bit because you've talked a lot about the on court right process, right, and teaching about the process. But kind of what are you doing off the court in your conversations, in your I don't know if you're doing talking about certain things or having them go through goal setting or whatever it may be, right? Because be honest,
Yeah.
we're in a day and age of a lot of things. There's instant gratification, right?
Right.
25 points, and this and that. But it's all about those daily things, especially maybe even with your younger groups, right? Because that's probably
Right.
the group you have to start it with. So when they get to the varsity level, they have that idea, right? Or at least have an inkling of it. So kind of what things are you doing outside of the court and the conversations you're having and phrasing it to kind of get them in that mindset and kind of realize that the process is really what makes you successful?
Yeah, boy, that's a great question. And I think that's ultimately coaching, in a lot of ways, outside of the X's and O part, that's probably the majority of what we're doing. First thing I would say is one thing I've thought of the last couple of years is I want to coach like I want my son to be coached. And I have no issues with someone being hard on my son. Now he's only 8, so it's in perspective. But when he's 16, 17 years old, how would I want his coach to coach him? I do think of that a lot. I'm going to be brutally honest with our guys, so much so that it's uncomfortable. It's hard. And like you said, instant gratification, but also people are scared of hard conversations in a lot of ways. I tell people we're not for everybody. I don't want to say that in a mean spirited way, but if you want to get really good at basketball or you want to be a part of a team, then we're for you. But if you want me to lie to you, if you want me to promise you that we're going to get you 20 shots, you want me to promise you that you're going to get to lead us in scoring, I'm not your guy. If you want us to have a plan in place to get you to where you want to go, and you're going to allow me to tell you the truth, then I do think we can have a great thing. So I think the first thing is you owe them honesty. I think you also have to find a way to have a culture where the other players value them, even if they're not one of your main guys. And we have a scout. We pride ourselves on a scout team, 1 or 2 teams in practice that run all the other teams' plays. And it's imperative to me that my main 5 or 6 guys, the guys that get all the newspaper articles, the guys that get the social media, whatever tweets and Instagrams, that they love those scout guys and that they appreciate those guys. And you want to see me flip my lid in practice, let one of my orange varsity guys do something disrespectful or unappreciate one of those JV guys. It doesn't happen much, luckily, but that's a standard. We have to figure out a way to appreciate everybody. Jay Wright always would always say that everyone's role here is different, but everyone's status is the same. And I feel that way about our program. There's got to be honesty. There has to be difficult conversations sometimes. There's a lot of one-on-one conversation with our older guys. You don't always have time for that with the younger guys, so it's setting those standards as a group. It's calling things out. When a guy does something that's not good for the team, it's immediately addressed. When a guy does something that's great for the team, it's immediately addressed. And then you have to have great assistant coaches facilitating some of those relationships. But with our older guys, it's I'm getting ready next week. I'll meet with our varsity guys one-on-one, sometimes 2-on-1, sometimes maybe my 2 leading scorers coming back this year. I might pull them in together and say, hey, I think you guys are the only guys with a lot of experience coming back. Just a couple of things I want you to keep your eye on and get some feedback from them. One-on-one meetings. Sometimes it's conversations with a parent. Most of the time, those are good, but you're addressing things head on with them. You're trying to get them to see your side of things as the leader of the whole organization. I think you have to be a man of high character, and I know that I certainly don't want to say that arrogantly or draw attention to myself, but I think parents have to be able to look at you from afar and think that at the end of the day, even if they disagree with some of your X's and O's, or if they disagree with the role their son has, they at least think you're a good man for them to be around. And I'll go to my grave thinking that's the most important part of this job. Do you set a good example? Do players learn character? Do they have the opportunity to become a better person just simply because they're in your organization? So I do hold myself to that standard. You have to be a role model in some ways, but those conversations have to be direct. They have to be honest. I think you have to allow your players to have a voice. Now, it may not be, at practice when you're in the middle of a drill, but certainly you can read body language. It may be grabbing them after practice, putting your arm around them and letting them know that what he did is not okay, but letting them know that you also know he's going through some stuff at school that you think's affected him, or it's relationship stuff. It's nonstop. It's nonstop relationship building. It's nonstop communication. I always joke that communication has never been easier, but I think kids have never been worse at communicating because we're in such a digital age that they don't really have to talk face to face much. I stay. The best thing that we do for our guys a lot of times is for 3 hours a day, they're off their cell phone. They're with me. And they have to have face to face conversations. They have to communicate, with their mouth. They can't text it. They can't tweet it. And so, in a weird way, communication's never been easier, but you have to have those conversations in person, and you have to get these guys to let their guard down a little bit and care about each other and make sure that the 15th player in your program or 15th or 16th guy in my practice feels important. And he feels like, even though he's maybe not even get to dress in the varsity game, that he had a role in Herbert's success, or he had a role in Jose Epinez's success. And I think we've been fortunate to have kids that become a part of that. And we have some that don't stick it out. They'd rather go do something else, and that's totally fine. I don't think you want to lower your standards or water down your expectations to meet certain people. I think you want to give your students the opportunity to achieve their goals and push themselves, a little bit even beyond that they thought they could.
All right, so heading into our last 2 segments here, 30-second timeout. Your dime, your dance floor. Discuss anything you want to discuss. Your family, program, something you want our listeners to know about. Any topic you want to flip it on us, ask us a question, whatever it may be. You do not have a referee yelling at you that you got to get the first horn, so it's really not 30 seconds. It's more of whatever, however much time you want to take, but it's all you for the 30-second timeout.
Yeah, no, I would I would kind of turn it back on you guys. In your experiences with athletes and even in this venture that you're doing with podcasts, what have you guys found to work or not work? Or we talked about advice for young guys earlier, someone that's coaching or someone that's trying a podcast. Like, I think there's a lot of things that are in our profession that are universal, whether you're going to be a basketball coach, you're going to be an entrepreneur, or you're going to be a doctor. From your standpoint with you guys and people you've worked with, what are those 2 or 3 traits that you would tell people, no matter what you're going to go do? You want to start your own podcast. These are the things that I think can help you be successful. And then for basketball guys, obviously I'm dealing with 16 and 17-year-olds, but things that you've seen players take with them, or at a young age you've identified in people that now we're adults and we're leading organizations, or for you guys, when you're venturing out and trying to connect people through a podcast. What are those things that advice that you have, or things you look for in people that you think are universal traits that would help people be successful?
That's a tough one, John. You get this one first, buddy.
Yeah, dang it. I knew
you get this one first, because I got the last one first.
You did.
Let me interrupt you and say this real quick. So being on your podcast, I've been on a handful. Your listeners probably don't know this, but to me, you guys are unbelievably prepared. You sent me some things we would talk about. You're very organized, very professional. So I'm coming at it from that perspective, and that, in my opinion, you guys are really successful. And what you have here is a great resource. So I'm setting it up with, you guys are already successful and you're doing a great thing here. And what are some things that have helped you do that, or traits that you think are universal in that regard?
It's funny, and I can start, and I would say, I was sitting in a graduation this week, and I was listening to the speaker, and one of the things he said, and one of the things I'm going to steal is, I think first, for anybody listening, is just be a good person. And I know that sounds simple, and I know that sounds maybe elementary, but I think by just being a good person and realizing that, and I think, and I'm not going to speak for Todd, but I think I've realized that as I've gone through this profession, everybody knows everybody in some way. So I think if you want to be,
nasty or rude or whatever to somebody, I think it's going to get back to you. And I think the second one I would say is just be hungry. Like if you have the want to outwork the people that want to do what you want to do, I say to kids all the time, I think we as adults make a mistake of saying to kids, you can be anything you want to be. Because I don't think that's true. And I tell kids, that's not true. You can be the things you work for. And I think that's what is something that I think we're losing as we're telling kids, you can be anything you want to be and putting it on social media and so achieve their goal. Well, you didn't see the hundreds of hours that so and so put in. Let's use as a basketball player at 5:30 in the morning on a shooting machine when nobody else was there. So I think if I had to pick two, I would say honestly, just be a good person to other people. And if you want something, go get it. Don't wait for it to come to you. Outwork everyone around you. Does that mean you're still going to get it? It does not. But I think without that, you have no chance at all.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I agree.
I kind of think like, you got to be yourself, right? Like if I were talking to you or talking to our other guests and I was on here and not being myself, everybody would know it. The kids would know it, right? So you got to, be true to yourself. And I really like your statement on communication. That's one of my biggest things. Like just being clear and concise with it, whether it's, hey, I need to do this or do this better. Might not be something I like, right? But tell me, or this is what I want, and then let's get it done, and I can figure out a way to get it done. That's kind of what we try to do with our guests. Of we have some ideas, but if you have something you really want to talk about or an idea, then we can communicate that and he can get the point out there. So those are two things I believe in, just being myself and trying to communicate as best I can, and we try to communicate as best we can with our guests, and being flexible. And I agree with John, like ultimately it comes down to being a good person and putting your best effort forth in whatever you do.
Yeah. Oh, that's great stuff. My wife is she's in the corporate world. She's a vice president for a pharmaceutical company, so she hires people all the time. And on the surface, our jobs are very different. I'm a teacher and basketball coach, but to your guys' points, she's always interviewing people. A lot of times she can tell in the first 3 or 4 minutes, are they willing to outwork somebody, like John said, and then ultimately that character, and then how do they communicate those things? So it's funny. It's like you talk to the people in different, workspaces or different leadership positions. I think a lot of those points are universal. And I think you guys asked me earlier about this, our culture and our program. It's the basketball part is a big piece, but those same things, if we can outwork people and we can be good people of high character, communicate with each other, let each other know we care about them. I think that's really what we had this year for our, 28-3. And why I made that post on social media was when those things come together and you have a bunch of people with those traits, it's a really enjoyable organization, a team to be on. And I think your guys' answers were perfect. And I think it fits with some of the things we were talking about with our guys from this year.
So as we go into our last segment, we call it quick hitters. This is a kind of a segment for Todd and I just to have a little fun. Todd is going to start off the quick hitters to try to save my voice. This is just a little rapid fire questions, just to have a little bit of fun.
All right, the best part about coaching in Southern Illinois.
Competition. It is not for the faint of heart. Our league is a player driven league, obviously high level players, strong, fast, athletic, and then great tradition, great head coaches. Whether you're going to go watch 1A or 2A basketball in Southern Illinois or Southwestern Conference or 3A, 4A, there's really good coaches and really competitive programs with a lot of tradition. So we play in front of a lot of big crowds and a lot of cool gyms. But on the flip side, it's really difficult to win. But I think that's ultimately what makes it great.
I'm curious, maybe a favorite team or a favorite coach that you watch or learn from the most.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier, my wife and I both graduated from the University of Illinois, so we're big Illini fans, and we certainly like watching them when we can. From a coaching standpoint, I really enjoy watching Bob Ritchie as the coach of Furman. I know that's not a team that people probably hear a ton about. They were in the tournament a couple years ago and upset Virginia, but I really enjoy watching them play. I think the style they play is similar to ours. Lenny Acuff is another coach who was at Lipscomb. They kind of play a style that we like. And then here's the cool thing, guys. I got SIUE in my backyard, so Brian Baroni is a great coach, just a great guy in the community. So I enjoy watching the Cougars play when I can, and I get to go over there and watch them practice. And they just made history by going to the NCAA tournament for the first time. So I'm gonna shout out my man Brian Baroni and the SIU Cougars in there as well.
All right, so me and John, we're compiling lists. We ask this question a lot, and one day when we have time, maybe when we're done coaching, whatever, we're gonna hit these spots. But what's where's the secret place or the best place to eat in Edwardsville? Where are we going when we come down there? And we could actually
Oh
make this
man.
one happen because it's a little bit closer than some of
I'm
the places we
yeah, I'm
talked.
gonna give you a few. So actually, last night my wife and I just had a date night. We hadn't gotten away in a while, so the kids stayed home. We went to a place called Musali's Prime. It's a pretty high end steakhouse in town. So if you're looking for a great steak, that's a place. There's another place called 1818 Chop House. Really nice steak place over by the high school. When John Calipari came here to recruit Mark Smith, he asked for an Italian place. We sent him to a place in town called Bella Milano. So that's your Italian spot. So we got two great steakhouses. We got an Italian spot. And then we got a great ice cream spot called Annie's. So if you're an ice cream guy, I recommend Annie's ice cream. But those two steakhouse places, and there's hundreds of others, but those are a few of my family's favorites. With the kids wanting ice cream all the time, but my wife and I like to get away to those other three places are terrific. And I didn't marry another teacher, right? So I got the corporate wife. She can help pay for some of those nice
Right. I
dinners.
was going to say, John and I might could just stop with the ice cream because I don't know if we can afford the other place. So we're going to do ice cream, John, when we go down there.
All right, I'll give you a local traditional place. Dairy Haven is like this old drive-up burger ice cream joint. That might be more in our budget. That's been here for
All right.
long before I got there. So we'll point you guys to the Dairy Haven.
All right, sounds good.
All right, so we've never asked this, I'm going to be honest, in quick hitters, but I thought of it when I was typing up this episode. Coach, how many technical fouls do you have in your career, and do you have a good tech story?
So first thing I would tell you is I am proud to say I haven't gotten a technical in three seasons, I believe. Definitely at least the last two. I probably deserved one this year at one point, but the referees were nice to me. So I haven't had one recently, but I've certainly had some. I have a funny, quick story. When I was a JV coach with Coach Waldo, it was the year where they really started imposing the box rule. For a while we were kind of free to roam as coaches. My voice is not as loud as Coach Waldo had this great, loud, powerful voice. So I find myself getting out of my box to try to give instruction. To be fair, most of the time I'm not yelling at the ref. I'm trying to get some sort of instruction to my team. Well, we were at East St. Louis. I was coaching a JV game. I got my first technical, deservingly so. I was mad about a non-foul call, and lost my head a little bit and deserved a technical. Well, as you guys know, when you get your first technical, you have to stay seated. The crazy circumstance that the play was on the far end, and the ball got thrown over the point guard's head, and it was coming towards me. So I'm seated. I'm supposed to stay seated. Well, I see the ball coming towards me, and just kind of a natural reaction, like athletic guy that's played sports. So I pop up and I grab the ball and I throw it back down to the referee. And the poor referee, he comes running over. He's like, "Coach, I got to give you a technical." He's like, "They're all over me about this box rule. You already have one technical, so you have to stay seated." And then when you walked up to get the ball, I met the ball like kind of over by the scores table, like 2 or 3 feet probably past the box. And of course, at the time, I was like, "Man, this is ridiculous." He's a great guy, and I think he felt pressure from the assigner that was there that night or whatever. So I did get ejected in a game. And so the best part is, so Coach Waldo's already back with our varsity guys, like going over like the pregame notes and stuff. So I come walking in, and I won't cuss on your podcast, but he looks over and goes, "What the hell are you doing in here?" He thought I was like sick or something bad had happened. I said, "Coach, I just got ejected." And he said, "What the hell did you do? Did you get ejected?" I said, "Well, I stood up and got the ball and threw it back." And he just gave me this big old smile, and these old school guys, right? They're pretty hard on referees, although you always really respect referees. I mean, that guy he'd put on Bobby Knight type shows and stuff. And he just kind of put his arm around me and said, "Well, I hate that you got ejected for that. You didn't even get your money's worth." And so he kind of laughed it off. And I've since have talked to the referee, and he felt terrible about it. But I guess my story is I've technically been ejected, although it wasn't for anything outrageous. It was just standing up. And I told my assistant coach, "You should have got to the ball before me, then I wouldn't have got ejected. I don't know why I jumped up there to grab that ball." So that's the only time I've really gotten myself in a bind. But I have a lot of respect for our referees, and they really do a good job. And so I try to manage myself, but obviously we all lose our cool at certain times. But I've luckily have gone a couple of years here without getting a technical.
All right, favorite basketball movie?
All right, so probably every basketball coach says Hoosiers, and I'm going to put that on there. But I like Love and Basketball. I don't know if you guys are familiar with
That's a
that
good
one,
one. That's
Yeah.
a really good one.
probably not one. Yeah, some of my buddies will probably make fun of me because it's kind of a love story in the background of. But I remember watching that one late in high school, early in college, and I loved it, and I loved the soundtrack. So I'm going to say Hoosiers, Love and Basketball.
All right, last one. You're an Illinois coach, so we're going to ask you thoughts on the shot clock coming in.
Yeah, so there's a lot to that. I'm looking forward to it. And I certainly think it has its advantages, but at the same time, I don't think it's the fix all for basketball. And I think some of these people are naive if they think, "Oh, we'll just put a shot clock in and then all these guys are going to start playing better basketball." I do think it takes the one equalizer out of the game. the elephant in the room is you're allowed to hold the ball if you feel like you need to. And so we've done that some. Coach Waldo was a master at that in some ways. I always look at it from a standpoint of the defense can dictate if you play or not. I don't know why defenses don't come out and guard teams that do that. So I didn't think it was needed from that standpoint. But as a coach and a competitor, I am looking forward to it. I think there's some 2-on-1, there's 2-for-1 type situations if you watch the NBA game. In some ways, I think it benefits us the way we play. I think we're pretty efficient on offense and defense. We may be able to get people in some late shot clock type situations. And also, when people spread us out, a lot of times we're not the most athletic team in our league, although I think we have good players, we're not always the most athletic. And so we have a hard time chasing and trapping and doing those things. I'm not necessarily going to say it's going to fix basketball, people that think it needs fixing. But I think as a coach, you adapt with the times, and you always just try to do what's best to help your guys win a game. But certainly, I've gotten a lot of newspaper people and internet people reached out right away because Coach Waldo is well known for holding the ball and running four corners. And there was a game against Alton long before I was at Edwardsville where he held the ball, and the score at the end of regulation was like 6-4 or 6-6, and they went into like triple overtime. And so I still get a little bit of backlash for that game, which was long before I got here. But Coach Waldo would always tell you that four corners offense was so good that they made it illegal. So why would you not use it some if you had and I just tell people that like the Mark Smith team, Mark Smith was Mr. Basketball, 240-pound point guard. We had AJ Epinesa, like I said, who was a starting defensive end for the Buffalo Bills. And then we had a guy in the corner, Oliver Stephen, who had a really good career at McKendree, who shot 50% from three. So my point is, they made it illegal because, North Carolina used to do it, and you have a point guard who can get by anybody and then throw a lob up to a guy that can put his elbow on the rim, or throw it to the corner for a guy that shoots 50% from three. It's a headache. It's a nightmare for teams to guard. And so we used it to our advantage for a long time, but I would hope we'll use the shot clock to our advantage the same way. And as a coach, like I said, you're always trying to find ways to put your guys in a spot where they can win. So we'll do the same thing. I think our players are looking forward to it. It'll maybe we played a shootout at Moline this year with it. It didn't impact the game at all in that setting. Some tournaments around us used it last year. I think we had one shot clock violation in the game at Moline. So I'm not sure it'll have a huge impact on a lot of things, but I'm looking forward to it. It'll make us have to adapt some and strategize a little bit differently.
Coach, we can't thank you enough for joining us. Great episode, a lot of great perspective on multiple things. We really appreciate it. And I'm glad we got to talk to you because, like you said, there's a lot of good basketball across this state. A lot of our listeners are from the Chicago area that maybe don't know, right? Because once you get past I-80,
we have to joke with people all the time. There's still like another 2 hours south of us, so people think we're like at the tip of Southern Illinois. Being in the Metro East, there's you can still get down to Carbondale, about an hour and a half, and even south of that. But great state of basketball. There's no doubt.
So we can't thank you enough. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you for what you do as a resource for coaches. Obviously, I feel honored that you and a little bit undeserving to be on, but I appreciate you guys having me on.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the After the Timeout podcast in partnership with the IBCA. Please be sure to rate us on whatever platform you are listening and give us a 5-star rating. For more show content and updates, please follow us on Twitter at After the Timeout. As always, thank you for listening. Tune in next time for more content on the court, off the court, and anything in between.